Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives of the world's leading global brands. Today, we're joined by DeRetta Rhodes, who's the Senior Vice President of HR for the Atlanta Braves. Welcome to the show, DeRetta. How are you?
I'm well. How are you this morning or afternoon? Or whatever.
Afternoon. I'm just ending soon, and you're just starting, right? What time is it where you are?
Yes. It is only 10 o'clock where I am. So.
Yeah, fantastic. And you are back to the office, but you're at home today, right?
That is correct. We only have it's a small group of individuals that are coming back, but we do have the players back. And so as everyone knows, we're playing baseball. So
that's the important thing.
That's the most important. That's the most important.
Yeah. How has it been getting back? It's obviously taken a bit of time, right, for baseball to get back. It's been quite tough.
It has been, and everyone was anxious. Everyone's excited. I think not only for us as being part of the front office, but also for the fans. And so it's been really good that we've been able to get back to what we typically would do, although we're playing a little bit differently with no fans. And so that takes on a very different dynamic, but it's been good for us to be able to see baseball again.
I still think it's pretty funny where you have like the cardboard cutouts in the audience.
Yeah. Yes,
and the music. The audio that's been interlaced.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't think it would work, but it does.
It does. And it's really weird to watch any type of sports without any type of noise. So you had to have that noise to just give, the ambiance. So it's worked out really well.
Yeah, similar to football in the UK. Like now, there was a few games without it, and it was like, it's so strange because you watch sports for the atmosphere, don't you? Almost as well, right? That's what becomes part of it. So it's interesting how we've all innovated through this to create that and make it happen for the fans, which is great.
Yeah.
Before we jump in, tell everyone a little bit more about yourself and sort of your background and journey.
Sure, I'd love to. So, it's funny. I've been doing human resources, and this ages me, for a little over 20 years. And I've had the opportunity to work for some amazing organizations and amazing leaders. I started my career out with PepsiCo on the restaurant brand side and worked for both Taco Bell and Pizza Hut. And then from there, worked for ADP and had the opportunity to just look at how human resources is done back office. So it's a very different role than what you typically have when you have a traditional role within an organization, because we pretty much serviced and worked with organizations with their HR. So that was really fascinating. So splitting from there, I went and worked for Ernst & Young, EY, in a diversity and inclusion position, which also was so very fascinating. And I think given the climate of where we are today, it's been very helpful for me to be able to draw from that experience. In the midst of all of that was going on in my career, I also went back and got my doctorate in adult education, which I feel like has also served well for me in terms of the conversations to have about organizational design and things of that nature. Then I veered off a little bit, and after working for Turner Broadcasting and doing some really great things with them, veered off a little bit and worked for a nonprofit, the YMCA of Metro Atlanta, and now I'm here with the Atlanta Braves. I kind of tell the story about the Atlanta Braves because when I started working for Turner Broadcasting, they were a part of the Turner Broadcasting family. And when I was there, they spun off, they went elsewhere, and it's just been fascinating because a lot of the leaders that I got to know and knew of when I was at Turner Broadcasting are still with the Atlanta Braves. And so now I'm in sports entertainment, which is very different than anything else I've done in my career.
Is that a common theme then? Because is it just for you looking for that next challenge? Because
Chris, that's a great question. I think for me, there are a couple of things that are common themes for me. One of them is that I think it is the next challenge. I like to be able to go in and either build or enhance. And so when I think about everything I've done in my career, it has been that. It has been the opportunity to go into a new role, to experience new things. The other thing I would say to you is that I consider myself a lifelong learner. And so all of these experiences have helped me continue to kind of build my skill set, build my understanding of people, and build my just toolkit around different organizations and how you can support them in different ways.
That's super important, and it's a real common theme amongst many successful leaders I speak to. They're always looking for that next challenge, right? And they're going from consulting, front office, back office, different industries, different different geographical regions, moving into to constantly stretch and add to that toolkit. And now you're here at the Braves, so
I am.
So, obviously, for the topic for everyone tuning in, is what's next? HR crisis strategy. Now, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about COVID, but it's time to move on to look forward to where we're going, where rather than where we've been. We can't control that, but we can control where we're going. What in terms of understanding the crisis management, what's been your approach and your kind of overall view so far through this?
I think that's a great question. And I think it's so funny because a lot of times the research is stated and what we've typically have dealt with has been crisis management. And my perspective of crisis management is that you're dealing with one situation at that particular time and how critical it is. I think of 9/11 that happened in the States. I think of different things that may have been region focused, but not worldwide focused, right?
Yeah.
So I think that from my perspective, there has been a shift for the skills that you need to manage crisis management. It's different now because it's crisis strategy. So what do I mean by crisis strategy? So crisis strategy to me looks like something that you have to strategize around for a long-term perspective with the short-term impact. And so a lot of the things that we're dealing with today, it's not crisis management, it's crisis strategy. We went from handling issues with the pandemic to going into specifically again in the States with social injustice. And so it's one of those things where you find yourself, if you don't think about it from management to strategy, you find yourself in crisis fatigue. So there has to be a way for us. And I think as HR professionals, we need to help our organizations and our leaders think of crisis very differently than what we've always thought of it. And putting in place that if it is going to be a constant crisis, what are those strategies you have to put in place to make sure you can build upon it and you can move on as you're dealing with it? So I think that that's something that we need to start thinking of. And I think we as HR professionals need to equip our leaders and our organizations for that.
Yeah, I really love the way you're looking at it because you're all right. It needs to be a longer term strategy than managing it in the here and now, right?
Right.
How have you gone about discussing with the leadership team? Because it is quite a big shift in the way that we typically approach it. What did those conversations look like with your own leadership team?
So I think some of the things that you have to think about when you're in crisis strategy is around all of those pieces that are critical, one of them being communication. So as before, you may have communicated the normal way that you would have, maybe quarterly. Now you've got to think about how often do you need to talk to the organization and what about? So if you think about, is it now around healthcare? Is it around mindfulness? Is it around how you now think about how you work because you can't compartmentalize it anymore? Work is at home, home is at home. And so how do you manage do that? And so it really is taking those very specific things now and putting strategy around them and having more of a, how do you handle it in 30 days? How do you handle it in 60, 90, 120? And then what does that look like when you start talking about budget planning for 2021? Long-term strategy planning for 22, 23. I think whereas we may have put things in little small areas around crisis management, we need to expand it and have it part of your ongoing strategy.
Have you started doing that now already in your own organization?
We have. I mean, if you think about, so it's funny you make the mention of the fact that we have cardboard fans as fans, right? Yeah. And so it is thinking about what is baseball going to look like for us long term as we get through this particular season. You've got to plan for the other seasons. We're no different than the other sports that are going on as well, you know? Yep. And so I think it's a matter of putting in more understanding around how do you deal with these things and equipping leaders on how to do that as well. One of the other things I want to mention that I think is really critically important, and I don't necessarily say to people, oh, training is a panacea and it fixes everything. What I do believe is that you do need to set up then small micro learning opportunities to walk people through what strategy now needs to look like, to help them reframe their thinking around strategy and how they work with their teams, help them reframe their thinking of how they may communicate. The other thing, it's so funny, I was on a different talk with some other HR professionals, and we were talking about performance management. And you would think during everything that's going on, would we really need to have a conversation around performance management? I think now it's more critical than ever, because you are hopefully helping your organization and individuals build more muscles in different areas that they may not have done before. One of them, again, is around communication. One of them is around how do you plan when things seem to be at such unrest? How do you put some level of continuity around something when it feels like something new happens every single day? So I think that's one of the things that we also need to help train our leaders on, so that they can help their staff in this time.
Or one of those trainings, I'm sure, is going to be how to manage remotely.
That is exactly right.
which many leaders have never done, including myself. I'm still on that learning curve, and how often to communicate. Sometimes I maybe be overdoing it.
Right.
People just let me get on with the job, Chris. And I actually think that I'm doing a good thing by over communicating, but they're like, leave me alone. So there is a balance there. And also the different technologies and tools that we use to manage remotely now also needs to shift and change as well. So yeah, definitely a lot to consider. What about, you mentioned in our last conversation, crisis fatigue.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? What does crisis fatigue mean to you?
So crisis fatigue means to me is that you wake up every morning and it's a new crisis. And I think, or midday, you're dealing with crisis upon crisis. We used to call them, putting out fires.
Yes.
What you find is that there are things that you're putting out fires all day long. And so, whereas some of us who had a regimen around, you wake up, you know what your schedule is, you anticipate some things to happen, right? But you don't anticipate the whole entire day to be filled with crisis after crisis after crisis. And I think what happens, and this is a great perspective, and some of us as HR professionals are dealing with the fact of how do you make sure your staff is safe if they're coming back? If they're not coming back, how are they safe at home? How much testing are you having them have to go through if they have to do COVID testing? If they are doing COVID testing, how is that impacting family? And typically, we're on the front lines with our staff on those questions on how to deal with that. The thing is that I will always say is that you have to give yourself grace. You can't answer every question the moment that it comes. You have to plan around those type of things. So for instance, if it is around health and healthcare, how do you then engage your healthcare providers to help support you with information and education and communication? You bring partners in when you may not have the answer that can help you also deal with whatever's coming your way. So you think of all these different ways to manage the fatigue with both yourself personally, but then what you have to give back to your staff and leaders. Because the thing is that, and this is what I found probably when we closed our office. So we closed our offices officially March 16th. And as a result of that, to your point, we had never stood up any way of working remote. You don't work remote when you play baseball. That just doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
So we had to stand that up pretty quickly. One of the things that we did in standing that up and with helping our leaders, and you brought it up, Chris, around the fact that we kept sending things out about how do you manage your remote population? How, as a remote staff member, do you operate? How do you put boundaries around when you talk, when you don't talk? How do you make sure that people have grace in this time? So for instance, if you're working from home, you can't manage the dog and the cat. They're going to do what they're going to do. Your pets are going to do what they're going to do. People are going to do what they're going to do. So you have to think through those things and help your staff do that as well.
Mm-hmm. So what about from a practical sense? Obviously, you're talking about crisis management, HR crisis strategy. What can we do for some of the steps we can take now practically to get things moving in the right direction?
So what I would say is that if you take a look at circumstances, I'll give you one. So we're dealing within a pandemic, right? And how all of that's impacted everything, not only how we work. Right now in the States, we're talking about how do people go back to school? How do the kids go back to school? My perspective on that is that what you do is with all of those circumstances, you put a framework together. So if it's a framework around, say, for instance, coming back to work, that framework would include what, first of all, is the plan? What is the communication strategy? How do you implement that? And how do you execute it? Those four things that I just mentioned, you can replicate that with any type of crisis strategy that you have to put in place. And so when you think about it from that standpoint, it doesn't seem to be so arduous or so hard because you're dealing with something that's sitting right in front of you. If you have a framework that you can put it in, again, it is understanding the circumstances, the communication strategy around that. Who do you bring in and how do you execute against that? And I think that you can put that framework around anything that you're dealing with from a crisis perspective.
Yeah, no, definitely. It applies to everything, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think because what happens, going back to crisis fatigue, it's about the overwhelmness of the crisis, right? So when you're faced with it, it is overwhelming to think about what is this thing I've got to handle right now, right?
Yeah.
But I think when you're able to pull it apart and look at it in fragments, put it back together, it makes it easier to manage.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. Kind of all overwhelming for me as the co-founder of the company when we realized obviously events globally are cancelled, which is really a majority of our business. And it was quite overwhelming to look at it as a whole. But then we broke down each kind of challenge or area we're focusing on bit by bit. It becomes more manageable. Otherwise, it just becomes too overwhelming and all consuming. And I kind of found myself trying to work on everything and doing a really bad job as opposed to focus on one individual thing at a time and doing a great job as well. What about sort of some of the next steps for sustainability and making this sustainable? Because I see all these great ideas and shifts that companies are making through this, which I'm really excited about. But how do we make them sustainable and they stick and we don't go back to old ways of working and things that we did before?
I think that's a great question. And I think around that is saying, you know, the saying that is happening and being discussed all the time is the new normal.
Yeah.
And so going back to what I just mentioned around putting a strategy, just a framework around those things that you're crisis strategizing all the time. I think what you have to do at this point is make that a sustainable part of your business. So as opposed to saying, oh, I'm only going to do this because I'm dealing with this particular crisis at this time. One of the things that my talent management director and I are focused on is really looking at what are those sustainable pieces that we now can train our leaders on, toolkits that we can provide them as they're dealing with things as they come to them. And what do I mean by that? I mean, so for instance, regardless of the fact that there's a pandemic and that we've been dealing with social injustice, we still have to plan our budget for 2021. And so in doing so, what are those things that we come back and say, okay, we know that we've had to manage very differently, as all businesses have for 2020. But what are those things that we can take out of what we learned from 2020, put it back in our toolkit and say, this is how we're going to manage moving forward? A perfect example of that is communication. And I think, Chris, you made a really good point. Whereas before, when we thought about how we communicated out to our staff, it was typically us coming together face to face, oftentimes every other month or quarterly, to talk about how the business was doing, how the team was doing, how we were moving forward. Well, when you're in a pandemic, the issue that you have to think about now is that you can't bring people together at all. So what is the way that you now are going to think about communication? And I think that made us think long and hard about, we do virtual town halls. How frequently do we do them? How do you make it a one-to-one communication where people can feel like they're connected, right? How do you create community for those individuals now that we're in a pandemic and people have to be social distancing or virtual? And so we put all of that together. So now moving forward for 2021, it is those strategies that we put together while we were in the pandemic. What are those that we're going to lift, we're going to shift, and we're not going to use moving forward as a long-term perspective? And I think that how we do communication, we need to take all of those and do them this way now, because you're able to get to people differently. People learn differently. People associate differently with how they're communicated to. And I think now we're taking that whole entire strategy, lifting it and moving forward. That's what I talk about. And when I think about for sustainability, where we're doing this for right now, well, what are those things that you're doing right now you can do long term that you've placed in it where it's replicable, where it's repeatable, and where it's sustainable in everything you're trying to do? And I just use communication as just one example.
Yeah, of course. There's so many others. What do you think the challenges are going to be? Because this is quite a big shift what it's not going to be easy.
No,
After centuries of operating in a certain way and a certain model, and it's because it's also a cultural shift as opposed to just a process shift.
I think that's a great point. And it's about relearning, right? You have to relearn what you've done before and do it a new way. And how do you get sustainability for that? First of all, it's habit forming. So you put it in such a way that it becomes a habit of how you do business. And I think in some instances, I have talked to colleagues of mine where they talked about, we were trying hard to put in innovation back in our business or try new innovation. Well, this time has made us do it. We didn't have a choice. Where it was speed to market or speed to staff, we had to do it based on the times that we were in. So what I suggest is that we document all of those things that we've done during this time. You do that, you document it, and then you duplicate it and you duplicate it and you duplicate it. And what happens is that it becomes a trainable thing and it becomes a habit that you end up doing regardless. So that's how we need to start thinking about new processes that we put in place, how we did things that were speed to staff, all of those things we put together and we make them part of the culture now.
Yeah.
I think what happens is that you've got to have people that own that have to repeatably do that for the organization. And typically it's your HR people that do that. And so us being able to be very equipped, comfortable around doing that as a new way of processing.
Mm-hmm. It's going to take time, right? We're seeing like these shifts happen quickly because they had to because of COVID. But in terms of it being sustainable and being part of the culture, that's going to take some time. Right?
It is. And I think the only way that and again, it goes back to me saying you have to give yourself grace in this. I think one of the things that you have to constantly do, though, is come back to it every single time. Because the only way that it becomes repeatable is if you repeat it, if you continue to do it and it becomes sustainable within a process.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we have to do. We have to be very, the words we love to use is intentional and deliberate. And so I think in this particular time and moving forward beyond COVID and beyond everything that we've dealt with, we're going to have to be sustainable and we're going to have to be deliberate and intentional.
Yeah, I got a quick question from Pamela on LinkedIn. Hi, Pamela. Thank you for joining us. She said, first of all, she said great insights. She said, could you please touch on how other ways that HR can deal with this pandemic without getting overwhelmed? Because we tend to forget about ourselves when dealing with these responsibilities. And I know during our conversation before, you were telling me quite often that we need to make sure we take care of ourselves first, right?
I have, and I think it's mindfulness. So I think I will tell you one of the things that I've talked to my team about. I need you to take your vacation. I know that you may have to take vacation and go nowhere, but take your vacation. Unplugging is so critically important because what happens is that if you don't unplug, you become fatigued and you're not able to handle the things as they come to you. And so you figure out a way to unplug, not only take vacation, but unplug during the week. And more importantly, unplug during the day. What I have found when I started and we started working from home, I was working from 6 a.m. to like midnight. Like it seemed nonstop. And the thing is that we've made ourselves so accessible, so quickly, responding so immediate. And I think sometimes you block off that hour for lunch and take it. Don't do text messaging. Don't do anything. So I think if we start thinking of it, how do we take that time during a day? How do you look at it during a week? And then how do you actually take your vacation? Take your vacation, unplug, don't read that email. I'll give you all a perfect example because I'm saying this and I need to constantly be coached on it. I received an email yesterday at 2:30. It's Sunday. You're supposed to be off, right? Received an email because I had it on my phone and immediately I felt the need to respond. Immediately. And sometimes we need to just wait a minute. Couple reasons. It gives you an opportunity to think through how you want to respond. And number two, it just gives yourself an opportunity to have a break. So we've got to figure out how to do that. I am not my sharpest when I'm fatigued. And so I have to figure out how do I continue to recharge myself as well.
I completely agree with you. And my wife's probably going to, if she's hearing this now, she's going to have a go at me and say, Chrissy, you got to take some time off. She's always moaning at me to take more time off and go on holidays.
Right,
So
right.
I'm a big culprit of that. I'm sure many people listening on LinkedIn now can relate. It's almost more difficult now, as you said, as we're more accessible, because people, with email, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WhatsApp, like if I haven't got a text, I've got a phone call. If I haven't got a phone call, I've got a LinkedIn message. If I haven't got a LinkedIn message, I've got an email. It's just coming from a million different directions.
Yeah.
So it's super difficult to turn off, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is. And especially and I think for us as HR professionals, it's equally difficult for us because I always have indicated or said that HR is the conscience of the organization. So you feel very compelled to be able to respond, to get back, because you want to make sure that you're showing compassion and concern, because we oftentimes are the holder of that. The reality is that in order for us to be the holder of that, we also need to do it for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. Well, with all that said, I'm going to jump into our quickfire round. I didn't warn you about this. I didn't warn anyone about this, so you weren't ready. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you 5 questions.
Okay.
And you have no more than 30 seconds to give us some amazing answers. Are you ready?
Okay.
Yeah. What was the number one thing that was holding you back from becoming a successful HR executive?
My own self. I think I listened to all of the haters and all of the negative press.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest thing.
Yep. What's the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
The best piece of business advice that I just gave was given to me. Give yourself grace. Sometimes you got to walk away from a minute and then come back.
Yeah. What's some books you'd recommend to our audience and why?
My favorite, all-time favorite is Fierce Conversations by Susan Scott. The reason I love that book is because it talks about the importance of communication and that the conversation is a relationship, and that is both business and professionally and personally.
Could you share some internet resources that you use to stay up to date with current events? What's your go-to apps, online websites, resources that you go to?
Oh gosh. So Forbes.com would be one of them. Yep. The other one is HBR, Harvard Business Review. Love everything that comes out with that because it gives you such great context and information that you can share and that you can use. So those would be my top 2.
What would you say to your younger self when you first joined the HR profession now? What advice would you give to yourself?
Be patient.
Well, you wanted it all at once.
And I will never forget, I have another one of my leaders who also is a mentor of mine. And he would say to me, this is in the time of Michael Jordan. And he would say to me, let the game come to you. Don't always run out for the game. Let it come to you. And I was like, what do you mean? And because I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I want the ball right now. And so that helped me. Now, not in the moment, let me just say, I mean,
and I get it.
Yeah. But it helped me as I move forward in my career.
Yeah. And last one this is 6 technically, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's one thing about the organization, the business you're working in now that you're most excited about?
Oh my gosh. The fact that they love to do new things. When I started with the organization, we do it we call it seasons. It's not,
Yeah.
And so I'm in my 2nd season. And when I came into the organization, their willingness to do whatever I would suggest in reason now. But, but the fact of the matter is that they were so open to every suggestion, to every perspective, and that's what has been exciting. So it goes back to the question you asked me earlier, talking about challenges and what keeps me engaged in an organization is the ability to consider yourself being valued and that they are listening to what you're saying and wanting to implement those things that you bring to the table. That has been the best for me.
Yeah, it's what all employees want.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When you think about it from that perspective, they want to know that the contribution's being valued, they're being listened to, and that you care as well, which is an underrated one. Yeah, but with genuinely care, not that, well, look, thank you so much for joining us, DeRetta. I was super excited to speak with you, and I really appreciate you sharing your experience and insights with everyone. No one has all the answers, but I appreciate you sharing some of what you've learned so far. We're all on this journey together. And before we wrap up, if there's sort of one parting piece of advice, what would that be? And then where's the best place for everyone to connect with you if they want to reach out and say hello?
Oh, absolutely. So the one thing that I would say is just keep pushing those things that are important to you and that you that make that wake you up. Just keep doing those particular things and don't let others discourage you from that. I have a sign in my office that says always keep your daydream. So just keep your daydream and just keep moving that forward. The best way to get in contact with me is LinkedIn. I'd love to link in with everyone that would like to reach out to me, and I will get back with you and would love to talk and converse and just continue these type of conversations.
Amazing. Well, look, thank you so much for joining us. For everyone on LinkedIn, thanks for tuning in as always. If you're new to the show, please head over to hrdleaders.com/podcast. You can subscribe via your favorite platform there. Please like, comment, and share this with other HR colleagues to share the knowledge experience. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again, DeRetta, and I'll look forward to hopefully coming to see you soon to see you again.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
See ya. Bye.
Bye-bye.